Joshua Sandelin was appointed Commissioner of the Delaware Office of the Marijuana Commissioner in May 2025. Commissioner Sandelin has over 15 years of experience advising businesses, investors, and policymakers on marijuana regulation and public policy. Prior to his appointment as commissioner, he was principal of Sandelin Strategies, working across multiple jurisdictions to support licensing, compliance, and the development of cannabis programs. Sandelin holds a Juris Doctor from the Catholic University of America, a Master of Public Administration from Florida State University, and a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Jacksonville University. He is committed to transparency, equity, and good governance in emerging industry. Welcome, Commissioner, and thank you for taking the time today.
Thank you for having me. I'm really glad to be here.
So, we'll take it from the top. So, what's happening in Delaware? What's the state of the Delaware cannabis market right now? How many licensees, revenue projections, that kind of thing?
Yeah, so when I came on board last year, recreational sales were permitted, but had not actually begun yet. So on August 1st, we turned on recreational sales. We allowed our existing licensees to convert. That was part of one of the laws that the General Assembly had passed a couple years ago. So our medical operators, we had 14 stores open for medical. Thus far, 13 have fully converted. A lot of that deals with local governance and local ordinances about recreational versus medical. But all in all, almost everybody has converted over. We saw a pretty big spike in sales. Right now, we are month over month in sales. We're doubling our numbers from the previous year. Once we add adult use in, through the first 8 months of sales, we are at right around $78 million in sales total. One of the problems with projections is you make them up. So, trying to understand what's bottled into projections is really important. As I said, right now we've only got our conversion licenses open. I thought it was exceedingly important to go ahead and convert those folks because when I got here, the industry was on the severe decline, right? I had businesses that were circling the drain. They really needed some sort of injection here. And so the adult sales actually did that for several of these companies, creating more of a healthy, sustainable marketplace. We saw production increase. We saw variety of selection increase. That being said, what's most important to getting our numbers up and to getting this market fully fleshed out is getting our new licensees on board. So when the legislature passed legislation on full adult use, they created 125 new licenses across 4 streams, right? So across your labs, your cultivators, your manufacturers, and your retail. When I came in, none of those convert. The way the process worked for us was we ran a lottery. And so the lottery ran, and if you got selected, then you went through your real intense background check. And at that point, if you passed all of your things, then you got what's called a conditional license here, which is really our pass to go forth and conquer, right? Go find your location, go find your investors, everything you got to do, and come back to us when you're getting closer. When I came on board, none of those have been done. Since I've come on board, we have given out all the ones we're going to give out at this point, which is 85 licenses. The remainder of the licenses were either abandoned or have been denied for one reason or another. If we could talk about the bulk, there one was denied in bulk, and that's really stems from a predatory practice on our social equity program, unfortunately, which is something we've seen replete throughout the country. But it was really not great, but we're trying to right that ship and deal with that situation. But since we've done all the rest of them, folks are at different stages in the process. Again, we did a lottery. A lottery does some things really great. So it does equity and dispersion of license is very great. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't provide you with folks who have worked in the industry before necessarily, have investors lined up, have even owned a business. And so, we're pushing forward to try to get folks in the right situation. We're holding, talks, come meet with the commissioner, so that I can find out where everybody's at. We've undertaken with the Delaware Cannabis Industry Association program to first, we partnered with Del Tech here to train employees. So there's an employee class, come learn about the industry.
Del Tech is a technical
Correct. Delaware Institute of Technology, I believe. And so they come and they take the employee class. Well, as I looked around and think back to how, what have I dealt with in the industry? It's, again, we have a lottery system. So a lot of people have never even started a business, let alone a business in one of the most regulated industries in the country. Right. So What we are launching this summer in partnership with DCIA and Del Tech again is a licensee class, right? So each licensee will be able to come, and for social equity, the state will pay for it, and take it's about a semester and a half long course, which talks about everything from starting a business, your accounting principles, things like that, to like, are you a cultivator? Well, here's what you need to know about being a cultivation owner. Here's what you need to know about being a manufacturing owner, and really trying to provide folks with the foundation to make sure they're successful. Because at the end of the day, we don't want people either not getting open or opening just to fail. We want to put people in the best situation they can be. And that's tough sometimes. And so we're trying to use all the tools in our toolbox here to really get these licenses moving forward. Because as I've told people, you can look at our numbers now, and I'm actually happy with our numbers considering we just turned it on. But until we flush out, not even a year yet. I mean, we're projecting, we haven't even been through a summer yet or a spring. So this will be our first 420 as a rec state. It'll be our first summer. And while we only have, just under 1 million people in the state, we do get a lot of folks coming to visit, right? Seeing the beautiful beaches in South Delaware, our state parks, when folks come to visit, ensuring that they have access now and making sure the word's out is important. And so, if you just look at our numbers and say, oh, over 8 months, you did 78. I mean, I think you're looking at around 120 million total in 12 months. But I don't think that really, as somebody who's seen the seasonality in cannabis firsthand, I think it doesn't account for, what we're going to see this summer. And again, as we build out our licensing structure and as people come online and more access to cannabis happens, for instance, right now, the space between Newcastle, which is in Newcastle County, it's also a city, and Smyrna is a long drive. It's maybe 30, 40 miles. There's no cannabis in between those two places you can buy, right? There is no legal cannabis in those two places you can buy.
Is that because, how did Delaware handle sort of local jurisdictions and giving them the authority, the power to opt in or opt out?
Delaware placed a lot of control in the local government's hands. We set a floor of things that you can't go below. So you have to certain distance requirements between stores, between different landmarks. The cities can make it stronger, and many, many have. So that has been a complication. We don't do a local share in the tax revenue, and that has been a complicating factor. But, one of the things at OMC we're really trying to do is get the word out and talk to local governments and say, hey, this isn't a bad actor in your community. In point of fact, look around your community. You have plenty of illegal places in operation that you have no control over. This is the most regulated industry in the state of Delaware. I am, somebody in my office can turn on the computer and look all over this facility 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and pull up old footage. While we haven't had, crime in our facilities involved in crime, our officers have told me they have used the video footage to help apprehend folks who committed other crimes off premises because there's so much camera coverage. So spreading the word like that, making sure people know that we're there to be a partner, I think is very important. I think it was a decision the legislature made to, not overstep onto local control. And I think that's an important one. Our governor is a former county executive and, takes very seriously the division between state and local governments. And so, the legislature gave them a lot of control. It's initially kind of caused us some hiccups getting stores open, but I'll tell you, a lot of them are really open to cultivations and manufacturing, which is funny. Like when you roll out a new program, generally you do a licensing, you tier it out, right? Or you say cultivators open and manufacturers open, then we'll open retail. Here, it kind of just is happening naturally like that because of a local control issue. So we're seeing a lot of love from local governments for, our cultivators and our processors. Less so for our retail. But again, I think that's more of I see that as our job at OMC as well, to get to do PSAs, get in front of local leaders and show them that, this isn't reefer madness. This isn't the illegal smoke shops on every corner in your city.
So now, how is Delaware approaching equity, and is Delaware offering any particular programs or efforts to support equity and diversity in the cannabis market?
Yeah, so Delaware created a subs license group for social equity. What it comes with is, you got preference in the lottery, so you had your own separate lottery, which already, puts you in a better position than than the what we call open licenses. And then it also came with what we have called the social equity financial assistance grants. So when we did when the legislature created the conversion license for the medical, because it wasn't actually done when they did recreational at first, they came back and did it. They charged fees, very high fees for the conversion. And that money all went into and that money all went to a pot. Depending on your license type, yes. But yes, like $100,000. I mean, we raised, I think, a little around $4 million off of it. And so that money went into a pot, and that pot is used for what we call SEFA, Social Equity Financial Assistance Grants. And depending on what license type you are, depends on how much you get. Obviously, a retail needs less than a cultivation to open. And, we tiered out that way. We made it very simple. Did you get a social equity license? Yes. Send us your paperwork and say you did, and then we'll start sending you money. We generally tier it out. So we say, all right, we did 4 tranches of money, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter, a quarter. And then you get your first quarter when you've applied, right? You just got to apply, and we'll send you your first quarter payment. Then you'll get your second tier payment when you've identified a location, right? So you've got some sort of lease, you've got site control, right? Because that's the most important. But at that point, you can also put in for basically a lump sum. So instead of getting it tiered out, because I understand, if you're running a manufacturing facility or a cultivation, you have large capital expenses. So requiring them to eke the payment out over 4 periods doesn't make sense. So if they have a need, they can just ask us for it, show us what it's used for, what it's going to be used for, and we'll release it all to kind of make it as streamlined as possible for them. We also got a lot of commitments out of our existing license holders to work with social equity. We've had several actually seemingly take them under their wing, help them set up. They don't have a financial interest in it. They actually can't legally, and help folks get up and going. I think our first social equity cultivation should be coming online in the next month, if not sooner. The biggest problem we've had in our social equity rollout so far has been predatory practices, right? So a lot of folks fell into a trap. Huh? Say that again?
From investors?
Yeah. So what happened was, and I can only talk about it so much, right? Because it's ongoing. What happened was, and this has happened in other states, the same people. When the social equity program was designed and announced, flyers went out in the community saying, you too could be a part of the weed gold rush, right? Call us. And so people called, and they're like, yeah, here's what we'll do. We'll get your business going. We'll do your application. We'll pay all your fees. Just sign these agreements, and we'll be your partner here, and we'll get you up and going. And so people signed all these agreements. And when I came in, it was right before I got there, people started saying, why is the same person paying for all these licenses? And they started going through the process. We required turnover of all documents that you'd signed before we issued a conditional license. Turns out they were, I've been in this industry for, like you said, 15 years. And I've seen some predatory agreements in my time that I didn't agree with. These were the worst agreements I've ever seen. They were on their face designed to bankrupt the company and force to sell out for pennies on the dollar. I don't know how to put it any other way. So we looked around and talked with our team and talked with the legislature and the governor's office and said, the only thing worse than rejecting these licenses is letting this go forward and watching them fail, knowing we could have stopped it when we could have. So we denied them. Denied over 20 licenses, which was a lot for us, especially in the social equity. And so right now, those are in the appeals process. We go to we have a commission that does the appeal, then they can go to a state court after that. But, we'll kind of see where that goes from here. But, this program was created, to help folks who had traditionally been locked up for marijuana and preventing them from being locked out of the industry. And here we go. We got some company from out of state coming and taking advantage, blatantly setting up predatory agreements with them. And a lot of times, these folks, they didn't even read the agreements, right? Which, is not great, but also it's like you preyed on these folks, right? So, so we're working through that.
Situations like that, and where the individuals come with the completed application the day before it's due. And they say, you got to sign because it's due tomorrow. And people do sign.
Yeah, in their head, it was like, well, I sign and they'll do it, or I don't sign and I have no chance at it. So let's just sign it. Like, I probably won't even get it. I think this is what I heard people say. I probably wouldn't even get it. So I just signed and was like, okay, go for it. So it's a problem.
the work you've done in other jurisdictions. What lessons from that work did you bring to Delaware, and how are you doing things differently in Delaware?
I think, now that I've met all my counterparts in many of the other states, I have a way more sympathetic view of regulators than I had when I was on the business side of things. That being said, I think first and foremost, the thing I try to instill in the office is accessibility, right? Delaware is a small state, right? Everybody knows everybody in Delaware, but that, when you're the regulator, and you sit in, judgment of violations and you do licensing and all these things, you can kind of seem very removed. My licensees all can get a hold of me anytime they want. If they can't get me, they can get my deputy, no problem. I want to make sure we are available to answer questions. I very often, my common refrain is, this is not an industry in which you ask for forgiveness, not permission. This is an industry where you ask for permission. And there's nothing, and I've always believed that on the other side of things, but sometimes you send emails that just go into the ether, right? And and time is money, right? The more time it's taking you, the more money you're losing. So, the biggest lesson I tried to bring in, and the biggest, ethos was be accessible, be responsive, right? It doesn't mean I'm gonna give you the response you want, right? That's it means you're gonna get a response. Yeah, you're gonna get it, and it's not gonna be us. And that's, as we look at this licensing, people are like, well, you have an open stores. As soon as somebody comes to me with a license ready to go, they get open. Like we've opened cultivations, we've opened manufacturing. We'll go as fast as you let us go. And that's why I think it's important for us to also, do the programs like at Del Tech, because I find that people are stumbling. So let's pool our informational resources and help folks actually get their feet under them so they can get up and running.
So now, when you look at more mature markets, right, where oversupply and price compression, illicit market competition is still going on, what early decisions is Delaware making now to avoid those structural problems later?
I mean, those are problems I can't wait to have as a fledgling market. But that being said, I have seen them, and as a business, it always lives in the back of your mind. All we can really do is kind of focus on getting sustainable companies up and running. Oversupply will happen at some point. One of the things I try to talk to new growers about is, hey, find your niche, right? Growing 30%, 35% THC is great and it sells, but if you find a niche, you have more stability, right? Then not just looking to the next company for the highest percentage, right? And I preach quality, right? And ensuring that, you can be stabilized over time. Fortunately, we do have room in our prices to come down a bit. We have seen prices drop since we went adult use, which has been nice. We'll continue to see that go down as more cultivators come online. Right now, our biggest problem is the competition from the illegal smoke shops, those that claim to be selling hemp-based products. I mean, I live in a very residential area. If you drive less than a quarter mile from my house, you'll pass 4 of them. If my companies wanted to be in this neighborhood, there's no way they could because of local control. Those products aren't tested, they aren't taxed, they aren't regulated. There is no accountability in the program. And so it's easy to sell them for pennies. You're selling it for a third of the price, right? And you're selling it in a more convenient location. And so it's tough to compete, and it's the toughest to compete for a new business, right? A brand new business.
Localities that have, sort of opted out, are they starting to have that discussion? Because you're right. I mean, it doesn't get rid of cannabis, and worse, it may end up having these illicit stores. So, so they're caught, right? They either have the legal cannabis come in or have to deal with the illicit stuff. So it sort of seems like over time, they'd come to that realization.
Yeah, and I try to be the forcing function for that. I engage in that conversation whenever I get a chance to, and I say, and it's amazing how quickly they grab it, right? Because they see it, right? They see it and they think there's, but what am I going to do? And there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what is even going on, right? Mm-hmm. Explaining to somebody who has never even consumed cannabis intricacies between the legal fiction of what is marijuana or cannabis and what is a hemp, mm-hmm. and everything that goes on in it can be overwhelming. And I find, I'm sitting down and having conversations with lawyers from our Department of Justice and having to explain to them all these, what is Delta 8? What is Delta 10? What is THCA? And like, it kind of, you can see a fog at some point. But I'll tell you, when I tell them, you have these illegal smoke shops, and I can point to them and they'll say, yeah, but yeah. And we're trying to find ways to actually increase the government's ability to intervene here and to, kind of crack down on that to whatever extent we can. Again, right now we're living in this legal fiction, which saying we're living in it, we're barely living in it, because most of the products that we pull from these stores that get tested are still testing hot for Delta 9. Even if you buy the THCA isn't Delta 9 argument, it's fine, but this stuff's not even testing right. So yeah, I think that conversation is ongoing, and it is starting to catch hold, especially, in localities where they're seeing them just so prevalent. Again, there's just so many right by my house alone, and I live in a purely residential neighborhood. So it's a conversation that is ongoing and increasing. I think the federal government's changes will help. I hope. I don't know what the enforcement mechanism is going to be for that. I think it'll fall to states again, but I'm hopeful.
So, having been at the New York OCM myself, I know that there's a real tension in cannabis regulation between trying to move fast, right, to get the market going, but moving carefully to get the rules right. And actually, New York State OCM is having this process now where they're re-examining some of the rules. So looking back at your first stretch in this role, where do you feel you got the balance right? And is there something that you would have done differently already?
Yeah, so I inherited the rules that we have here. And since we've already started that process, right?
It's always great when you can say that.
I know, right? Well, those weren't mine, but they are the rules we have.
Mm-hmm.
But I've read them very, very many times. And we have been going back through and saying, does this work for a business?
Mm-hmm.
What are our goals? Our goal is to protect public safety and provide access, right? And to provide access, we need the businesses to be able to operate and financially survive and stay in our system, which creates public safety. So we've gone through already and started pulling things out, patching up some stuff. Delaware has some of the strongest testing requirements in the country, especially for mold and bacteria. And so, the threshold is exceedingly low. And, sitting down with labs and other folks who are much smarter than me, I said, well, look, that seems low. And I look at everybody else's, and everybody points to other states where it's 100,000.
By low, you mean that it'll capture too many samples that really don't pose a danger to the public.
Correct. And so when we say we cap it at 400 colony forming units, right? That's by far one of the lowest, I think maybe the second lowest in the country. Our neighbors do it at 10,000, 100,000. And, I got a lot of pressure to increase it. And I said, well, honestly, I don't care what the cap is. I need to know what they are, right? Like, it can be 1 million of something, but if it's not harmful, what do we care? Right. And it could be 400 of something, but it could be 400 aspergillus. Mm-hmm. Right. And then we have a problem. So what we're doing now is we're providing a second pathway. So you can keep running under the 400 if you want, but we're providing labs with the ability to do a PCR test or some sort of identifying test where they can say, okay, it's 1,000, but there is none of the deal breakers in the list. And in that case, the caps are raised up. And so that was something that we'd been hearing about from our cultivators a lot, but we were able to preserve the public safety, but also create a viable path forward for businesses. And we're just going back through everything and kind of just looking with an eye towards those two fundamental principles.
Now, with your experience in D.C., what's your read on federal rescheduling, and how would a change in the federal status actually affect what's going on in Delaware?
I'm not as sanguine on rescheduling as others. I am a deschedule kind of person. Mm-hmm. That being said, any movement is positive movement here.
Yeah, and can you explain what you mean by reschedule versus deschedule?
For sure. So the current proposal that came out under Biden and Trump's recent executive order is to take it from a Class 1 or Schedule 1 drug to a Schedule 3 drug, meaning that there's a recognizable medical use for it, which is, again, positive because right now we're in Schedule 1 with some of the hardest drugs that there are, which is insane. A deschedule is to pull it completely off of the Controlled Substances Act. which would, have us living in a world more like alcohol. That would be great. The difference is that, and one thing I tell folks all the time is, okay, Schedule 3 is much better, but especially us recreational states, we're just committing a different crime as opposed to violating the Controlled Substances Act under Schedule 1, because we're not going to require prescriptions. We're not going to require all the things that would go into that. Mm-hmm. Also, it's not the real impact is going to be in the rescheduling. The real impact is on our dispensaries, which are in desperate need of it, right? They're taxed at effective tax rates of 60% and upwards. I've heard of some people having worse situations because of, the IRC, the Internal Revenue Code provision 280E, which says if you sell a Schedule 1 drug, you can't write off your normal necessary business expenses. And so that hits dispensaries at a much different level because cultivators and manufacturers can write off cost of goods sold. Mm-hmm. So they just bundle everything in that basket and they can write off stuff. But your dispensaries, if you bring in $100,000, you're not taking off from your taxes for employees, for lighting, for, all the things you've got to do, your rent.
So a liquor store and a dispensary side by side have very different tax implications.
Very, very different tax implications. And so rescheduling would get rid of 280E, which would be a boon for that side of things and actually help a lot, I think, in the sustainability and profitability of our industry as a whole. I think there's an argument that we'd be able to open up to the bankruptcy court proceedings, which would be a godsend for the industry. There's a lot of, folks that are left holding the bag at the end of the day. There is not this waterfall effect, though, from rescheduling that everybody seems to tell me that there is. Mm-hmm. What they're really talking about is descheduling, cross-border transactions, being able to bring in cannabis from Oregon and say it's Oregon grown. So I am hopeful that it gets done soon, even the rescheduling. Mm-hmm. But I hope that we don't spend all of our energy on rescheduling and forego descheduling at some point in the future as well.
Now, 5 years from now, to you, what does a successful Delaware cannabis market look like? And what's the biggest obstacle standing between here and there?
I mean, you've been in this industry. 5 years is, I always say cannabis years are like dog years, right? So 5 years is really, 35 years. I hope in 5 years, my goal is to have, many more licensees online, but also, I want to have a stable marketplace where we don't see super price compression. We don't have buy-ups of MSOs. There are Delawareans running these companies and actually profiting from the companies. Our biggest hindrance right now is, I think, going to be at the end of things might be our biggest advantage, mm-hmm. which is the local control issue. So right now it's a pain having to schlep around the state and talk to folks and tell them that we're not bad guys when I know that we're not bad guys. It can be daunting, but getting that buy-in now, I think, solidifies us as part of a community in the future, mm-hmm. which is much different than I think you see where you're forced to take these companies in. And when you feel like you're part of a community, you do more to stay in the community and the community does more to keep you in the community. And I think as we continue these conversations, that's going to be the foundation which keeps us Delawarean owned for the most part, and stable. I think, that's probably my biggest goal, is to make sure that, that there is a role for Delawareans in the marketplace. They're not bought out by MSOs, that we keep a stable structure and have quality products that people are proud to grow and happy to consume.
And I'll tell you, in New York, half the jurisdictions have opted out. And even some of those that did not opt out, prior to a retail dispensary opening, there were protests, politicians, all that kind of stuff. 2 weeks later, it all disappeared. It's just another store. So it's amazing. And anything we can do in New York to help you in Delaware get that message across. But I'll ask you two last things. First is, what's your hot take on what's going on in New York? I mean, what do people sort of think about when they think of New York cannabis?
Well, I don't know if I have any hot takes on it. Again, having met most of my regulators and the head of New York right now, John, is amazing. They couldn't have picked a better person for the position. But a market that size, I'm lucky. I have a small market, I guess. For me, the numbers are staggering, right? The amount, even knowing what I know about what's going on the illicit side of things and with the illegal smoke shops and all these things, the numbers are still staggering, right? Billions of dollars sold in just what, like not even 2 years yet. Where were you
A
guys?
little bit over 3 years, but the first year
Oh,
it
3 years.
was really like 1 or 2 stores.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we're up to about 620 stores now.
I mean, that to me is just staggering. But I don't really I don't really have a hot take. I hope that the musical chairs at the top is over, because I think you found the best guy for the job. There's never been a conference I've been to that John's at where I don't just sit in the audience and listen to the guy talk. He has a great accent, but he also just knows so much. He's so informed on the whole industry. So no real hot takes for me. I think I can't wait to see where that market can actually go to. It's going to be insane.
All right, terrific. And I'm sure he'll appreciate that. So anything else you'd like to mention about what's going on in the Delaware cannabis market with the agency that we didn't get to today?
No, I mean, to the extent any of our licensees are watching this, call us. If you have questions, you're not in this alone. You know, our job is to protect public safety, and our best way to do that is to ensure that our licensees are successful, because otherwise people will have to go elsewhere to unregulated marketplaces to buy cannabis. So yeah, never be shy. Always reach out, send us an email, call the office. There's always somebody there to, well, not always, but during hours, there's always somebody there to pick up, and we're always happy to help. For me, that's the most important thing, is that licensees know that they're not just floating around on an island.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's critical for them to know that and to believe that. So as we close, I wanted to thank Kayla Montalvo from your office, the Community Relations Officer, for helping us schedule time with you today. And thank you, Commissioner Josh Sanderlin of the Delaware Office of the Marijuana Commissioner. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I really appreciate your time.